Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Technology, Media, and Telecom at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be going into an extended discussion of the metaverse that actually we started off in an earlier episode with two returning guests, Neil Barbour and Ian Hughes. Welcome back to you both.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be here.
And the original plan was for us to really talk about the aspects of the metaverse that we'd only just begun to get towards in a previous episode. But there's one other big thing that's gone on, well, just in the previous day, which is Apple's announcement of its new headset that came out at the Worldwide Developers Conference. But I guess, why don't we set the stage to begin with about really expectations about the next level of metaverse and environments. I mean, we seem to be in this intermediate stage right now in which a number of clients we talk with, a number we see in the media reports, people are reporting the death of the metaverse and it's not really going to happen. And, it was a nice idea, a flash in the pan, take your particular metaphor. But yet, certainly what we saw yesterday is that however you want to label it, the idea of the metaverse is healthy and strong.
Absolutely. I think the death of the metaverse thing is more death of some of the hype. And everyone shifted to AI for a little while, but obviously now all shifted back to headsets and things like that, which it's all related. Everything's related to it. And Neil and I were just at the Augmented World Expo last week, which is a big gathering of the industry. And everyone was talking, every conversation either started with the metaverse isn't dead, and every presentation metaverse isn't dead, and also referenced the potential coming of the Apple headset and what would it do and what would it be. And so, amongst the industry, there was a buzz and a vibe about it as a product, but there was also lots of things that were not going to be the same as it. And so there was a lot of buzz about competition and a lot of buzz about how you might engage with people and with things differently. And the whole metaverse thing isn't one particular thing. It's, as we've said before, a way that we communicate online. And for instance, Neil Stevenson was on stage being interviewed at the start of Augmented World Expo. And he's the author of Snow Crash and the creator of the metaverse word, if you like. He's like the father of all this as a sci-fi author. And even he was saying it's not a thing that lives or dies. It's just a way of communicating, and that a particular visualization he had or a particular idea he had that is kind of coming to pass in certain ways, but there's always these twists in how we interact with things, isn't there? And somebody comes up with something different or does something in a different way. But clearly, big events like a large company like Apple diving into a product category like that is quite important, I would say.
Yeah, we were at the show on June 1st, and there was a sense that some of the bigger companies were trying to plant their feet, the expectation that Apple would say something on the other side of the weekend and change the entire industry that these companies and people have been hammering away at for nearly a decade now. So you saw Meta announce the Quest 3, which has some feature parity with some of the things that Apple talked about on June 5th. You saw Qualcomm sort of talking about their development platform, Snapdragon Spaces. They were also involved in the Quest 3 announcement to a certain extent. They say they're modifying their XR chipset platform or advancing it for the new headset. Lenovo was there showing a new VR headset. So there was an air that a wave was coming and they needed to be ready for it, even if they didn't necessarily have revolutionary jumps forward to the point of what you might describe what Apple did. But they were ready and they knew it was coming. And they wanted to also be ready to have a compelling value proposition for customers who maybe didn't want to operate in the Apple ecosystem or pay the Apple premium to be an early adopter in that ecosystem.
There's also a big software stack to consider here as well. And things run on all sorts of hardware as they do today. And so there were a lot of applications, a lot of developers that had things like toolkits to help industrial workforce do their thing. And they will run on a HoloLens, or they will run on an iPad, or they will run on Magic Leap. And clearly they're going to run on the Apple gear because it's all cross-platform stuff now that we're kind of getting used to and expecting. So it's not just that lock into the ecosystem, wherever Apple would like.
Well, Ian, you talked about what that walled gardens that tended to exist. I mean, some of the hardware pieces have historically been one of the issues around, you can only see this particular game or environment or what have you in these particular set of headsets. But we're now starting to do the same thing that we always do in technology, is that we are abstracting some of the capabilities so that all of the headsets do all of the environments, and that the new technologies like the Apple headset continue to draw. They've got that strong gravitational pull, to pull in all of the ecosystem around them.
Yes, Apple did fire one salvo in that particular direction, because they announced, particularly with the Vision Pro headset, a partnership with Unity, and that everything will run if you build with Unity, as opposed to everything will run if you use Epic's Unreal, Epic, Fortnite, Legal Battles, all those things going on. So they were talking to, a mass adoption platform and development tool, and a lot of things are built on Unity in the App Store anyway, and a lot of the things in the App Store will already run. That's the kind of important part of the Apple piece. But they were a little bit walled garden on that, or say firing corporate salvos more than anything.
Well, before we get too far down the road, let's address the elephant or the headset in the room and talk a little bit about the Apple headset. This is something you were both mentioning, all the various participants in the headset marketplace today. A lot of the things that we've seen to date have been really consumer level, the sub $500 kind of devices. The Apple headset is much more than that, yes?
It's $3,500 or $3,499 for the marketeers, and that is a hefty sum. But it's called a Pro for a start. It's called Vision Pro, and a lot of the initial stuff that they showed on the release was people at work or in hotels traveling, engaging with one another, and then needing to watch a movie on the plane and stuff like that. So it wasn't directly hitting every consumer on the planet. That wasn't what they were targeting, because clearly people aren't going to drop that sort of money for those sorts of things.
Yeah, we estimate there are about 30 million installed AR, VR headsets globally right now. And a vast majority of those headsets were sold for under $300. I'm thinking of the Quest 2, going back a ways, the Samsung Gear VR and the other snap-ins moved the needle on the market. A lot of those headsets have churned out, but they definitely represent a big chunk of this market. So to say that this device is not double that, it's triple that, it's quadruple, it's way more than even the enterprise level headsets that have been coming out over the past few years, which often haven't dared to cost more than $1,500, is quite a statement about the technology that they want to include. I think it's clear that they wanted a certain feature set, a certain tech stack, a certain wow factor for the first one they put out, so as not to maybe replicate some of the mistakes of maybe poisoning the well, so to speak, as some of the snap-in headsets did circa 2016, 2017. And there is potential down the road to, I think, as Ian was sort of suggesting, this is the Pro. You look at what people are using the most, what they value the most. Maybe you focus on that, take out some of the things that aren't as important to the average user, and you find a headset that's more palatable to a mass market consumer. At this price level, what are we thinking that they ship? Maybe 500,000 in the first year, something like that. And they can grow from there.
And one of the things about this headset, and we've been talking about this all day, is how it actually works, because versus how it may have been presented that it works. So this is a VR headset. So they didn't say VR, but when you put it on, you have two screens in front of your eyes completely covering your face. But on the outside, you have some very, very quick cameras and high resolution cameras and low latency stuff that's picking up the outside world and projecting it onto those flat screens in front of your face. And that is complicated and difficult stuff. So some of the current VR headsets do some of this inside out awareness thing, but they're very cheap cameras. You can just about see where somebody is. They're not high end things until you get maybe into like the Quest Pro does it better. But the Apple thing is now up in the realms of Vio, and Vio do these kind of video-based headsets for car designers and for fighter pilots. And so their headset is like $6,000 as a Pro one. So it's kind of coming down from that way rather than necessarily coming up from the heavy consumer Quest arena. And that's a difference. So here they've got, and they mentioned in their tech pitch, they've got a 12 millisecond refresh rate. So that is incredibly fast. And Bio's 11, I think. They're up in those kind of spaces. And when you blink, it takes you 100 to 150 milliseconds to blink. So it's a camera refreshing that quick. So that's why it can show you the physical world and hence be in complete control of everything you see much more easily than the lenticular things like Magic Leap and HoloLens, which are trying to fight against the light that's coming through from the visor because the real world's actually out there, you're actually seeing the real world, and then they're trying to cover it up. Here, the reason they've got this dial on the side of the Vision Pro is that you can just turn that off and make it a complete VR headset. That's what that dial was, to say a little bit of AR to full VR. But really, it's all just controlling those screens because they have 100% control of what's in front of your eyes.
Well, in contrasting something like the HoloLens that is projected, that gives you the ability to go see the real world, and then with augmentation on top of it, I think the important part that you're identifying is that what Apple's approach is it's as though you're turning the level of the shades on the front of the screen to be able to see more or less of the real world, but you're still seeing that through the camera representation.
Yes.
It's how much of the camera feed from the outside world gets delivered to you, or how little, depending upon just simply the turn of a nut.
Which is why there was no conversation about field of view. So a typical AR headset or smart glasses, whatever, will say about the field of view. It's the viewing box where they can actually get some digital content in. And so you find whenever you put any of these headsets on, there's a little box in front of you where you might see some things, but everything clips and you see the real world either side, or the physical world either side of it. So you kind of get used to it, but it drops some of the immersion. But when you're in a VR headset, there is a field of view, but that's just how big is the screen. And the bit that's outside the screen, there isn't anything to see because it's dark and your brain's not going, oh, there's a conflict there. And so this thing is giving you that total immersion, whichever mode you're working in. And they don't then have to argue about the specs of that side box.
Right. I think, when you look at headsets like the HoloLens or the Magic Leap that have more gone for the truly translucent display with computer-generated imagery projected onto it, you're running into exactly the problems Ian's talking about, a low field of view. Sometimes the imagery seems sort of washed out, particularly if you're in a certain light setting. And for Apple to fully deliver on the promise of, we're moving your entire suite of apps that you're used to on your phone and your Mac into this virtual space, they almost absolutely needed to go for high resolution displays. A traditional solution to this problem, just the dial turned way up, everything way better. And of course, that's feeding into the price as well.
Turning your world up to 11, right?
Blue M&Ms all over. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess to that end, what does that really mean for the metaverse when you've got a device like this that can blend these capabilities? And I will also point out that Apple did not use the term metaverse in any of these discussions.
Correct.
And so where does that leave us?
Well, they didn't use the term metaverse. They didn't really say AR. They didn't really say VR. They didn't say AI. They only said kind of Apple ML. So they steered clear of the buzzwords. But this was a hardware launch and an operating system launch. And so their focus wasn't on the wider ecosystem or what the metaverse might be, because they're then in all sorts of arguments with other companies about what they think it is and stuff. So this was can you use spatial computing, which is the more neutral term they decided to settle into. Can you use that to get to all the things that you normally get to in a slightly better way? So all the initial opening things were all flat screen things. It was just here's 3 screens, or here's a giant cinema screen that you can resize, or then moving to, you can look at your panoramic photo, but you can sort of step into it a little bit more. So that they were gently easing people into the spatial nature of things, but saying, look, you can run Excel. I mean, that actually, they said, run all these products. you can run Teams and you can run Zoom and you've got FaceTime.
Right. Having a virtual desktop with unlimited screen space played a major role in this product launch.
Absolutely. And so that, and again, the pro thing, because that then hits enterprise. And so if you can help somebody on the road who's traveling to be able to be more productive and have all their stuff like they would have in their office because they've already got 3 screens, then that's a great productivity gain. And there may be a demand for that. If somebody's saying, I'm on the road all the time and I can't work on this tiny little screen, what are you going to do? Why don't you get me one of these instead? And so then you're not in that expensive an area, are you? So I know corporates are all cracking down on everything, but it fits for that particular use case and those particular set of people.
Right. It's true, though, you didn't see a lot of cartoony avatars jumping around like you might have in a Meta presentation. Obviously the door is wide open for that sort of more 3D office and avatar presentation. But they probably saw the reaction to some of Meta's messaging around that kind of technology and said, maybe we'll just thump the brakes on that for now. Maybe we'll let that happen organically and not try to lead people there by the nose.
Yeah, so even when they did the first FaceTime showing, it was a lady in a hotel room with a big screen for some sort of product. And then she was talking, she had the headset on, but she was talking to 3 colleagues who were on regular video, but spaced across the environment. And it did not show what she would look like to them. And it wasn't until much later on in the presentation, it showed that when you first pick the headset up, you stare at it and it scans your face and creates an avatar for you, which is just a head and shoulders, it's a head and shoulders photorealistic avatar that it can animate. That's the one that gets projected into all these other applications, but they didn't really show that. And that's also the avatar that's used to do the inside out view so people can see your eyes, because they want people to not be disconnected from the physical world. And so anybody outside your headset, when they look at you, depending on what you're doing, will see almost like you're wearing very dark shades. And inside the headset, you can see the eyes and the bridge of the nose, just like you would if you were wearing ski goggles. But that's actually the CGI version of you.
And that interesting piece that you're identifying, that it is not translucent glass, that in fact there's a screen on the outside, screen on the inside, and a lot of computational power to make all this stuff run.
Yes, but it all runs on it as well. I think that was one of the surprises, was that even though all the way through it, there was a wire going from the back of the headset down somebody's side. That was only a battery pack. So all the computation is on board. It's not tethered to another puck or to your iPhone, or you'd have to plug it into your Mac or anything. It is a complete standalone device, just like the iPad is, just like the iPhone is, just like the Mac is. But obviously they'll all be in this ecosystem where eventually they'll be able to hand off to one another, I should imagine. And just going back to the kind of more traditional metaverse avatar applications, if you like, that's what everyone else will be building, because this already runs a lot of things, and things like VR chat and Rec Room and things that already run in the Apple ecosystem will be working as VR applications without having to do much, because that's what they already do when you run them on a Quest 2 or run them on a Rift on a PC. So they didn't have to invent any of those, and then you can kind of pick your own flavor. Just like if you run Microsoft Teams, we're starting to get avatars in Teams now, and very soon we'll have the avatars in virtual workrooms. Well, that will work in that headset because they're supporting Teams. So they don't have to go down that route of owning that part of the metaverse conversation.
There's simply a much better window into each of those worlds.
Correct.
And just to circle back to that point about it not needing outboard computational power, or at least the presentation of it being standalone is going to play an important role in the value proposition going forward. At $3,500, you certainly say, wow, that's an expensive peripheral. But if it's a standalone computing platform that's replacing one you already have, suddenly that cost structure starts to make a lot more sense. Maybe I don't need to buy a Mac. Maybe I just buy this. I don't think this is there yet for a few obvious reasons, but that down the road is going to play a major role in truly transitioning people to a new computing platform, not one that controls an existing computing platform.
Well, we get into this sort of next stage of the device being the window into whatever that back-end infrastructure happens to be. And if that happens to be Microsoft, Office 365 environment, where you can see the world's largest spreadsheet, all of that computational work, the presentation happens someplace else. And the headset really is simply your window into that world. And in many ways, much like phones and laptops are today for hosted applications.
Certainly the cloud streaming of content, or even the hybrid piece where some of it is processed elsewhere in a sort of distributed computing fashion, but some of it is processed on board if you can cope with them. And those kind of architectures and applications are starting to exist, and that there's no reason at the moment, even with just cloud gaming, you can run it on anything, and that's a screen. So it just run it on that. It doesn't have to do anything. It just needs that network bandwidth. But trying to be an AR device in VR, it needs some evaluation of an understanding of the world around it, potentially, for some of the things. Though for most of the things that it showed, a floating window doesn't need to know the geometry of the room. But obviously, the Apple stack has things like ARKit that can scan the room, and I assume it's going to have lidar sensors and stuff like the iPads and the phones do. So it will potentially be able to do those cleverer, proper AR things. But if it needs to go and get the content from somewhere else and have it streamed to it, it can do that too, because it's just what a web browser does.
It's interesting because Apple hasn't paid a lot of mind to cloud streaming or cloud rendering just yet. They've sort of let some of their competitors or peers, so to speak, Microsoft and Google have put more muscle into that segment, to varying degrees of success. So if they do want to go that route, it'll be interesting to see how they build up their own stack in that area, which you assume they would. That tends to be what they do, or if they try to go out and partner with an AWS or let the apps that operate on that platform at least go out and find those other solutions.
I guess they've been chasing the making their own chips, isn't it? I mean, all of that presentation was about, oh yes, everything's now our chip.
Right.
No more Intel. And so chip fab and manufacturing hardware has been, and then creating an underlying operating system, all the layers of that operating system across all the devices to be able to do all these things, and then letting the developers get on with it. And the whole app store, they kind of invented the app store, didn't they? So even if they didn't, they made it popular. So that means that those applications will be going off doing whatever they need to do, as long as there's APIs to support it. And there's clearly APIs to support talking to the network, because that's what all these things do. So if there's a cloud rendering thing that needs to happen, that may just be there's a third-party service to do that thing. Just like, there's a third-party service to do large language modeling. You don't have to do it they don't have to do necessarily their own. They just go off to ChatGPT in a third-party application.
And yet this winds up being the front end of all of it.
Yes.
What does this mean? I'm curious about your thoughts. I mean, what you saw at Augment and some of these implications. What should we be thinking about for next steps? Does this bring the metaverse back? Does this translate the metaverse into just simply another workplace productivity suite? What do we see out there?
I think this validates a lot of things for a lot of people. So even after however many years, 20 plus years of talking of trying to explain metaverse stuff and things to it, which was before the iPhone. Now everyone gets what an iPhone is and what an app store is and what a smartphone is. Apple have got a way of making those things normal, shall I say. And so rather than this being a, albeit very big, quirky, geeky sideline, Apple coming into it and however big this stamp is and however expensive it is and stuff like that, they've not ignored it. They've not ignored spatial computing. And spatial computing is the fundamental underlying piece of all the things that we're talking about in the metaverse. So our definition has all that stuff in about how we interact and got the 3D nature and the spatial nature to it. And then also, right at the end of our definition, it says enhancing the physical world as much as replacing it. That's what the metaverse does. Now, that's the dial on the side of this headset that you can be VR or AR. And so for people to now start thinking and somewhere in between. So a continuum of AR and VR, not just a binary thing. So it's people starting to think, what's the balance of a particular application I need to do? What are the social norms for some of these things about what the avatars are going to look like and how we interact? And should you put the headset on with your freaky eyes to record an event in spatial 3D to play back later? So when your kids are playing, should you be wearing that headset which aren't your real eyes? That's a weird social norm, or a non-social norm, non-norm. What's going to happen with that? So there's some of this is about how we feel as people about headsets and what they mean. And when we see somebody with one, do we talk to them? Because we can, because we think they're available to talk to, because you can see their eyes. And also what applications can be enhanced. The ones that we already use might have just a tiny little bit of extra spatial stuff that can be put in when you're in one of these headsets. And the API is there for the developers to just do a tweak. It's not a full blown, all singing, all dancing, everything completely AR. It's just a little bit of extra information coming out of it, or a little thing settling outside of an app. And so we've got a nice underlying ground there that it's not, you can just carry on building your same iPhone apps and your same iPad apps and doing whatever you want to do, but with a little bit of AR and a little bit of, will it work better in the headset? And that's quite exciting because the developers can emulate it and simulate it and do all that stuff.
I think it's interesting when Ian and I have talked to people about, the vision of the metaverse that we laid out and the reports that we published over the past few months. One of the common refrains we get back is, well, I don't have to put on a headset, do I? and sometimes we say, we will often, almost always, we say back, a lot of this will work on a flat screen. It'll work on your monitor. You'll be able to interact with these 3D virtual worlds and digital twins and the next evolution of the internet on the devices you already have. I think what happened yesterday is that people kind of see the clock is ticking, that more and more of this will move into headsets and eventually smart glasses, and it won't make as much sense to interact with this information on the flat screens anymore, that you'll have the depth and you'll have the other perks that come with having it all in the glasses or in the headset, which is, the infinite space of your virtual desktop and the ability of the overlaid data to interact with the world around it. I think a lot of that was abstract, and other companies have made valiant efforts to explain this value proposition. And Apple, as it does, made the best sales pitch yet. So I think, again, the clock is probably ticking for people who want to hold out against this way of interacting with information. And I think, as Ian said earlier, that spatial computing is kind of at the bottom of all this, and it's going to be a pretty important building block for the way we move forward.
Much as we've moved from paper to digital screens, from digital screens to spatial computing environments, we just need to make sure we get all of the social and societal aspects rolled up into this as we go.
Absolutely. That's always been part of our coverage as well. So one of the things, as we said last time, we're looking at industrial uses, we're looking at enterprise, B2B, B2C uses, and what's developing there. But our third area is the social side of it, what is happening, how is this impacting society, what's changing. And only a few days ago, as the Microsoft Mesh Teams avatars appeared in our internal, in our version of Teams, we ended up having a 3-way meeting where there was one person on camera, one person camera off, and another person, happened to be me, with my avatar. And the discussion was, how does that feel to each of us? Because we were all, the person on camera was stuck looking at the camera. The other two of us, they couldn't really see but which one they were talking to. And so there's a whole host of things. And we don't normally talk about tech in that way because it's how much it costs, what's the ROI, all that malarkey, which is all important. But this stuff is experiential. And as I said, is it freaky to talk to somebody with animated eyes looking at you in a headset? Will you just ignore them and not talk to them? Or will people get used to it? Or will they both be wearing headsets and both staring at one another's weird eyes? That's going to be interesting when there's a group of people in one place. All things we've not even had before. That's never been an issue. That's new even for this industry, to have multiple people with a VR headset on actually being able to see one another. So what's that going to do to the dynamic of a room?
I'm sure with the proper VR simulation, your eyes would look less freaky and maybe you'd be replaced by an avatar that understood where your headset was and simply makes the headset go away.
Well, some of the things like the webinar we did, I'd already done that with my webcam, and my graphics card has an application to replace my eyes so that they are always looking at camera. And so it's not as freaky and as noticeable, but it's not perfect, but it aids the ability to look camera central while occasionally glancing down at notes or something like that. And you can do it and people don't know. And you tell them afterwards, they weren't my eyes. So we're kind of in that space again, and that becomes a social construct. And what is that a social norm as well? Is that disingenuous of me to not have my real eyes? Is that going to freak people out? Do they pick up on that? All these things are wonderful things for psychologists to study and us analysts as well, because we get to experience it too.
We're just making the world better than it is in reality.
Let's hope so. That's what tech's always done, isn't it? Nothing's ever gone wrong.
Well, I guess the challenge is we'll have to see where this shakes out, but certainly a lot of stuff to think about. Well, thank you to you both. All sorts of interesting perspectives.
Thank you very much. It's been awesome as usual. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Eric.
And once again, so many other things we could discuss, but that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us, and thanks to our production team, including Carolyn Wright, Ethan Zimmern on marketing and events teams, and our agency partner, the 199. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're going to be discussing a similarly nebulous topic of zero trust. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.